Hello, welcome, Galacron here. We're gonna do the next chapter of Heracles, or as most people know him as Hercules. So, we have next up, Hercules presented himself at the court of King Eurystheus, and there showed the king evidence of the successful completion of his first mission. The sight of Hercules standing before him, armed and invulnerable in his lion skin cloak, caused a certain degree of introspection in the already insecure monarch. In future, he decreed there was no need for Hercules to present his grisly proofs in person. Well, how else are you going to prove that you did accomplish the mission? The matter could be settled by a panel of judges outside the city gates without King Eurystheus needing to actually meet his dangerous relative. Again, Hercules was cousin to King Eurystheus. King Eurystheus sat on the throne that was supposed to be Hercules' throne, but Queen Hera made sure that did not happen. Just in case Hercules disregarded these instructions, Eurystheus ordered the construction of a large bronze urn, a big pot, basically. This was buried up to the neck in the throne room and had a lid designed to withstand extreme pressure. Not that would matter for Hercules. This is a guy who held up the heavens. Then, in the hope that the world's first panic room would be ready before Hercules returned. That's a kind of funny way of putting it. The world's first panic room. A big bronze pot for the king to hide in. But it works. King Eurystheus sent the hero off on his second mission. This labor continued Eurystheus' vendetta with the children of Typhon. Again, Hercules killed a lot of children of Typhon and Echidna. Like, a lot, more than 7. But anyways, Typhon and snake-bodied Echidna, because Echidna was half snake body, and then the upper half was that of a human woman. So, but the Lernaean Hydra went one better and had not only the lower body of a serpent, but the upper part as well, the Hydra. Unlike the Nemean lion, which was already plaguing the Argolid before the labors were thought of, the Hydra had been carefully prepared for the forthcoming challenge, like a star athlete before a major event. Hesiod's stitch right here. The evil-minded Hydra of Lerna was nourished by white-armed Hera, Queen Hera, for the goddess was beyond furious with mighty Heracles. Yeah, she wanted Heracles dead. That part is true. So we continue. The Hydra was the most lethally poisonous creature in all of creation. And I actually believe that, regardless of what pantheon of gods we're talking about, I suppose an argument could be made for the Midgard serpent in the Norwegian, the Norse mythology. His name was Jomungand, and supposedly had poison breath, death breath. Supposedly. My personal take is the Hydra blood was the most poisonous ever, and Hercules dipped his arrowheads in that blood, with Hydra blood, and it was poison, and he had taken out anyone he shot. Even a giant, Geryon, he shot and killed with that specific poison. But we'll get to that. Serpents might kill men with their bite, but the Hydra could do so with just her breath. Same thing, the Hydra. Hydra breath was poison if you breathed it. In fact, the writer Hyginus assures us that so venomous was the creature that any man who was so much as breathed in deeply while he crossed the path where the monster had slithered died in the greatest torment. Can you believe that? Died in the greatest torment, and the Hydra wasn't even around. It went in there, and then it left, and then the man would show up, breathe the remainder, and then died in the greatest torment. That's saying something. Unsurprisingly, locals were deeply distressed by the arrival of this monstrous creature. Distressed, but not necessarily surprised. The town was already unhealthy, as it was situated beside a marsh, like a swampy area. Into that marsh, every year a lamb was cast as a sacrifice to the beings which lay beneath its waters. For Lerna was one of the few places where the underworld of Hades was linked directly to the world of men. So there was a gateway in the marsh, and the Hydra guarded, supposedly, that gateway into the underworld. I mean, the Hydra, she was there. So some people interpret it as, if you're going to try and go into the underworld, you'd have to get past the Hydra first, which more than likely, you're not going to be able to get past her. So, in fact, it may have been around the time of the arrival of the Hydra that Lerna was abandoned altogether. Modern archaeological excavations of the site date the abandonment to the later Bronze Age, and thereafter the place was used as a graveyard by the people of Argos. A graveyard. Presumably to save the deceased from a lengthy journey to Hades. Well, that's using your head. Yeah, we'll just bury him here, so when their spirit is escorted by Hermes, the gateway to the underworld is right there. That's one way of doing it. Here's a stitch from Pausanias' Guide to Greece. Distant from Argos 40 stades, or 4 miles, and no more is the sea at Lerna. On the way to Lerna, the first thing on the road is the Erasinus Spring, which empties into the Phrixus River, and the Phrixus meets the sea between Timenium and Lerna. We get back into it, where the torpid stream of another spring left the marsh. The marsh was a hillock on which grew a large tree. This spring was the Amymone, named after a distant ancestor of Hercules. In Roman times, the tree was seen by the peripatetic Pausanias during the preparation of his guide to Greece. So, though by his time a certain skepticism had crept in. Okay, we have another stitch. Pausanias. At the source of the Amymone grows a plane tree. They say it was in the shadow of this tree that the Hydra came into its strength. I am ready to believe that this creature was larger than other water snakes. And yeah, the Hydra was a water elemental, if that's the correct terminology, but like a fire elemental, a water elemental. In this case, the Hydra was a water elemental. So, larger than other water snakes, and that its poison was exceptionally deadly. However, I believe it had originally one head and not many. Like, it had 9. One head was immortal. However, I believe it had originally... It was first described as multi-headed by Pisander of Camiros, who did it to make the monster more terrifying and his poem more memorable. Well, again, there was one... It had 9 heads to start if you cut off one head to replace. One head was immortal and you couldn't kill it. Even if you cut it off at the neck, the head, was still alive. Even the eyes would move, So one head you just couldn't kill. It's just impossible. The rest you could. But there was one primal head you just could not kill no matter what you did. The Hydra's den was under this tree in the swamp. From this base, the monster made regular sallies into the surrounding countryside, where it devastated crops and herds of cattle. So again, King Eurystheus would have been duty-bound to send a hero to destroy the creature. Even Queen Hera did not already have the confrontation in mind. This is King Eurystheus, because, again, we got to recall, Queen Hera was invisible, standing, next to King Eurystheus, whispering into his ear, have Hercules do this so he dies. In this case, Hera did not have this idea to send Hercules after the Hydra. King Eurystheus made that idea up and said, well, that Hydra's been killing folks left and right, and Hercules, you have to go kill it, thinking that he will die. Most people would think the same thing, because any soldier who passed that Hydra, the Hydra, died, never came back. Furthermore, as with the Nemean line, Hercules had previous experience in this brand of monster slaying. As the 1st century AD playwright and philosopher Seneca remarked, perhaps not altogether seriously, when the 2 serpents sent by Hera, way back when Herc was a baby, had their swollen throats crushed by Hercules' baby hands, he was practicing for the Hydra, which is kind of funny to say it that way. Pausanias may also have been correct that the Hydra started its career as the bane of Argos, with just a single head. But Hera had built in a nasty surprise for Hercules, or any other hero who came to destroy the monster. Traditionally, the way to kill a snake was to chop off its head. So Queen Hera arranged that as soon as a head was lopped off, another 2 would spring up in its place. So this sounds like a pretty dangerous monster. It's kind of funny that it's a child of Typhon and Echidna, and then Queen Hera comes down and uses reality alteration powers and gives it this ability to have one head just cut off and then 2 more spring in its place. That's just kind of interesting. So, we have a kind of a stitch here. This is why the Hydra became the symbol of SLA terrorist group in the 1970s, and the name of a subversive organization in the Marvel comic books, Hydra. Normally a Captain America, villain is the group Hydra, but they tend to branch out as Hydras generally do. Destroy one branch and 2 others were supposed to spring up in its place. Today, a Hydra-headed problem is a situation where any solution just makes things worse. So, they're kind of right on that one. Since the Hydra had 9 heads, by the time Hercules got around to it, we can assume that at least one hero had made the attempt to deal with the beast already. The longest continuous account of the meeting of Hercules and Hydra came from the library of Apollodorus, and to this we now turn to a stitch. So, here is the stitch. For his second labor, Eurystheus ordered Heracles to kill the Lernaean Hydra, Born of the Lernaean marsh, that monster would go out to the plain and there ravage both the cattle and the country. The Hydra had an immense body and 9 heads. Okay? 9. 8 of these were mortal, but the middle one was indestructible and immortal. So Hercules mounted his chariot, and with Iolaus, his charioteer, he came to Lerna. The horses were halted when the Hydra was discovered on the hill beside the springs of the Amymone, where it had its den. Into that den, Hercules unleashed a storm of fire arrows. Again, we have to remember the Hydra is a water elemental, and so forced the monster to emerge. So the Hydra, right off the bat, getting arrows that were on fire shot into its den, she didn't like that. So she came out of the den into the open. You're still in a swamp or a marsh. There's trees, there's water. Probably not the best, terrain, if you will, to have a big fight against a monster, but that was how it was. As soon as it did so, he seized it and held on tightly. So we get back to it. The battle began. Hercules had protected himself from the snake's venomous breath by winding a wet scarf about his face. That's usually left out when other sources talk about that fight, that he put a wet scarf around his face to not breathe the breath of death from the Hydra. And the Hydra now reciprocated by winding itself around Hercules' body. At this point, another of Hera's little surprises popped up. So we have a stitch. While the Hydra wound itself about one of his feet and clung to him, a huge crab now came to the aid of the Hydra by sinking its pincers into Heracles' foot. Well, again, this is Hera sending down a stupid crab. Okay, back to the text. Hercules smashed the crab to pieces with his club. There are other accounts that he stepped on it and killed it, but regardless, he killed it, and quickly. So, but was stumped by the obstinate refusal of the Hydra's heads to be stumped. Okay, I know that's kind of a funny way of putting it, but being Hercules, our hero obstinately continued decapitating the beast until a veritable forest of heads now confronted him. 50 heads. Okay? 50 heads were there, ready to kill Hercules. Each with venom dripping from its fangs, and also the breath is venom and poison. Things looked grim for our hero until a bolt of inspiration hit him. Here's the stitch. As the crab had helped the Hydra, in his turn he called on Iolaus, his nephew, who set fire to part of a nearby wood and heated his sword in the flames. Then as Heracles took off each head, Iolaus cauterized the stump after, and so stopped new heads from sprouting. Having dealt with the multiplying heads, Hercules then chopped off the immortal head. This is key. Okay, we get back to the text. In his epic poem, The Fall of Troy, the Roman poet Quintus Smyrnaeus pictured the scene. Here's the stitch. The many-necked Hydra flickered its dreadful tongues. Some of its fearsome heads lay severed on the earth, but many more were budding from its necks. That stout-hearted pair, Hercules and Iolaus, were hard at their toil. The one mowed off the fierce heads with mighty strokes with a sword. I think it was the sword Hercules got from Hermes, his brother, and it was a golden sword, and apparently it was outstanding. While his companion, Iolaus, seared each neck with glowing iron until the monster was slain. Okay, so we get back into the text. The cunning idea of cauterizing the Hydra's necks is specifically attributed most authors to the inspiration of Athena. Now, there's been others that it was Iolaus's idea. There's been other accounts that it was Hercules' idea. That Hercules said, Iolaus, get a firebrand, and when I cut, you burn. So we have 3 different accounts, okay, of who made up the idea. After I cut, burn. Okay, burn the stump. So I honestly don't know which version is true, which account is true, of who thought up the idea. We have Athena, Iolaus, and Hercules himself. So, Hesiod, for example, bluntly states that the creature was destroyed by the plan of Athena. Well, if Hesiod said it, then it has to be true. Hesiod is the authority, so I think I'm going to have to go with Athena. Whispered some telepathy to Hercules. Because Hesiod wrote the Theogony. That's like the Bible of Greek myth. I'll go with that then. I'll go with Athena if Hesiod was the one who said it. However, we do not know whether it was through the suggestion of the goddess, Athena, or by his own initiative that Hercules slit open the poison sac of the snake and dipped the heads of his arrows within. So, he had a bunch of arrows that were dipped in Hydra blood, which was poison. I don't know how many, but it must have been like 50 or 75, because he used them in the Gigantomachy, which is the War of the Giants, and he used them in other cases. So he must have had a lot, okay, of the Hydra blood poison arrow. The arrowheads absorbed the venom and became almost as deadly as the snake itself. In his case, what did not kill him certainly made Hercules stronger. Well, yeah, you could definitely say that. He now had an incomparably deadly weapon to go with the invulnerable shield of the Nemean lion's skin. Hercules also had a shield that was indestructible, made by Hephaestus, but we'll get to that later. The cloak of the Nemean lion's skin is said to be impenetrable, even by blunt force, because Hercules used his wooden club against the Nemean lion, struck it right in the head, and it fell down, and guess what happened? The lion got right back up and shook it off. So even, it's not just stabbing through the cloak of the Nemean lion's pelt, even blunt force trauma is still not going to get through that cloak of protection. You could knock over Hercules, but he would get back up. So, Hercules was fond of calling his arrows sorrow-bringing. Well, yeah, I figure. He could not have known how accurate that description would later prove to be. The final immortal head had been the last to be chopped off of the Hydra. This Hercules buried on his way home at the roadside on the way to Elias, to make sure that no one unearthed the head, which, being immortal, would be both alive and in a foul mood when found. Yeah, that goes without saying. A foul mood. He placed a large rock over the burial site. It was a hole. And he chucked the head in and put a big rock that Hercules assumed no one else could lift. Like, it was like 30 tons. One big stone. So Hercules was like, well, no one's as strong as me, so I'll just make it a heavy stone, a giant boulder. The rest of the corpse was burned in the impromptu pyre that the cauterized fire had created. So all of it was burned except for the immortal head. Therefore, the waters of the marsh were hot, pungent, and undrinkable. Well, they said that Lerna was, a total dump anyway, so who really cares? They turned it into a cemetery. Who's going to go drink water from that? Given the marsh's pre-existing link to the underworld, one might suspect a sulfuric volcanic spring, but the ancients had other ideas. We have a small stitch here. The marsh of Lerna, where the burnt hydra's heat makes warm the depths, those polluted waters. So I guess the water was warm or hot. That was stitched by Statius, the book of Thebaid. Okay, so death simply shifted the Hydra to the other side of the portals of the underworld. Death, I wonder if they mean Thanatos. Death simply shifted the Hydra to the other side of the portals of the underworld. The monstrous snake remained as a guard, barring entry to the kingdom of Hades, which is the underworld. A job which it shared with the better-known custodian, Cerberus, which is her brother, because Cerberus, the three-headed dog, is also a child of Typhon and Echidna. So, a hound so bountifully endowed in cranial development. Although the crab sent by Hera was, almost literally, a footnote in the story, the creature was rewarded for its kamikaze ankle biting. This is kind of Hera's kind of petty. She sent a stupid crab to distract Hercules from fighting the Hydra. Like, really? So, a footnote of the story, the creature was rewarded for its kamikaze ankle-biting attack with a place in the heavens next to Leo, where it became the astrological sign of Cancer. So, again, this is kind of, lame and stupid. It's like, I'd like to talk to Queen Hera, Queen of the Gods, and say, hey, Hera, you're supposed to be actually important to get transformed into a constellation in the stars, in the heavens, like Perseus. He was a great hero and a great warrior, and Perseus never went to the underworld because Zeus said no. He's proven his worth, and upon his death, Zeus says he belongs amongst the stars. Used reality warping powers, reality alteration, and the body disappeared of Perseus and was transformed into a constellation in the stars, the constellation of Perseus. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of others and just different animals, monsters and stuff, but the crab became the zodiac sign for Cancer. And I'm just like, yeah, but here's the problem. It was just a crab. And all it did was clamp its pincers on Hercules' heel. It didn't hurt him. He just hit it with the club, stomped on it, and it was dead. So, talking to Hera, I would say, hey, that's not worthy of being a constellation. It's just a dumb crab you sent. That failed, that did not hurt Hercules. Hercules killed it. And here you are, with your reality alteration powers, and you send it up to the heavens, and it's the constellation of stars, Cancer. So, yeah, that's just my opinion. However, I think there should be something that the animal, monster, or human or hero did. Something you did that was like awesome or great or memorable to become a constellation and say, oh, this person or this monster belongs in the stars forever. The constellation, blah, blah, blah. Okay? In this case, it was Cancer. The crab, constellation Cancer. So, that's just my opinion. I think that's kind of a lame person or monster to actually get itself its own constellation. I know it's Cancer. I know the zodiac signs. I get all that. But couldn't you, pick something else? Something that's worthy, that did something awesome or, impressive to actually become, Cancer or a constellation of some sort. But anyways, it doesn't matter what I think. All that matters is what Queen Hera thinks. She's like, it's my crab, and it won't go to the underworld, to see Hades. So the answer's no. And she's like, no. The answer's no. And she uses her, again, she's Queen Hera of the gods. She has reality alteration powers, just like Zeus. And she just intervened and said, no. The answer's no. She just plucked it and said it's going up into the heavens and it gets its own constellation. And I'd be next to her saying, but why? It's just a stupid crab that failed. And she goes, nope, sorry, I want it this way, and that's the way it's going to be. So, who's going to go and question the queen of the gods? Nobody. Zeus might say something, but at the same time, he wouldn't want to get into an argument with his own wife. So, she's the one who said it. She's the one who did it. And therefore, this worthless crab who failed and didn't do anything impressive was zipped up into the cosmos, the constellation Cancer. A worthless crab. So anyways, the next one up is the Cyrenician hind, which is basically a deer, but it's kind of a magical deer. It had super speed, like how it ran. Really fast. Super speed running. Almost like a superpower, you could say, because it ran so fast that if you fired an arrow, it would run and the arrow would miss in almost every case. So I think there's only 5 of them, and the goddess Artemis keeps 4 of them locked up somewhere or in a certain spot, and apparently one of them was in Greece on Earth, like roaming free in the forest. So that's the one the hind. That's what we're going to get to next time. So that's going to do it, guys. This is Galacron signing off, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.